They returned from the mission, but something was left behind. There were no injuries, no equipment failures, no signs of combat. And yet, no one could explain why those super soldiers came back different, quieter, more precise, as if every movement now obeyed something no longer under human control. The report stated that the mission had been completed, but no one could say what had actually accomplished. What you're about to hear is not a typical war story. It's the account of what happens when soldiers stop following human orders because they've begun obeying something greater. If you enjoy military science fiction, conspiracies, and wars beyond human understanding, subscribe to the Galactic Battles channel and stay with the story until the end. The real conflict has not yet begun.
They returned in silence, not the silence of exhaustion or trauma, but a functional silence, precise, almost comfortable. The ships landed within predicted parameters. Systems operated without failure. Bodies were disembarked exactly on schedule. To any superficial observer, the mission had been an absolute success. That was what unsettled me. I had analyzed reports for years. Off-world conflicts were nothing new. Super soldiers came back broken, unstable, altered by neurological failures or sensory overload. They returned aggressive, confused, or emotionally hollow. But they never came back like this. They never came back to intact. Physically, they were perfect. No injuries, no cellular alterations outside standard parameters, no visible mutations. Biomechanical enhancements responded with above-average efficiency. Neural implants operated with exemplary stability. It was as if the hostile environment of the mission had exerted no pressure on them at all. Still, something had changed. The first sign appeared in the post-return examinations. Brain patterns showed an unusual organization. It was not the absence of emotional activity, nor forced suppression. It was alignment. Distinct regions of the brain operated in continuous synchrony, as if sharing a single, silent objective. The activity resembled deep states of concentration, but sustained for hours even at rest. They no longer rested as before. They slept little, and when they did sleep, their brains did not enter normal cycles. They remained active, executing something the medical algorithms could not classify. It was not dreaming. It was not wakefulness. It was another state, officially. The mission had been simple: reconnaissance and neutralization of an unidentified threat in a distant orbital region. No confirmed contact. No preserved enemy structures. No conclusive imagery brought back. Only confirmation that the objective had been achieved. But achieved how? Visual recordings from helmet cameras contained gaps, not common technical failures, but clean cuts, perfectly spaced. Entire segments of time simply did not exist. Internal clocks, however, continued to mark continuous passage. For the systems, nothing was missing. For us, entire hours were gone. The super soldiers showed no curiosity about these voids. They accepted the data as complete. They did not question it. They did not attempt reconstruction. It was as if those hours held no importance at all, as if whatever happened there had already been fully processed and archived somewhere beyond our access. As days passed, subtle changes in collective behavior became apparent. They moved with absolute economy. No wasted gestures. No impulsive reactions. They anticipated commands before they were issued. They adjusted formations with impossible precision, even without direct instruction. It was too much efficiency to be explained by training alone. Even more disturbing was how they reacted to the human environment. Loud noises, crowds, intense emotional stimuli seemed irrelevant. They caused no stress, no distraction. It was as if the super soldiers operated on a different layer of reality, where such factors had already been filtered out. Some began to display minor physiological alterations. Heart rhythms synchronized among individuals who were not physically near one another. Identical muscular responses to distinct stimuli, a collective coherence that did not depend on direct communication. I began to suspect that they had not returned alone, not in a physical sense. There were no foreign organisms, no unknown implants, no signs of external contamination. But there was something shared, a common pattern present in all of them. Like a silent instruction running in the background, High Command insisted it was merely a natural evolution of the program, an unexpected but welcome leap. More efficient super soldiers meant strategic advantage, fewer errors, fewer losses, fewer questions. I disagreed. Questions are what keep soldiers human. The decisive moment came when one of the units was subjected to an unauthorized simulation exercise, a scenario of total command failure, no orders issued, no objectives defined, only artificial chaos. They did not hesitate. They organized within seconds, defined priorities, neutralized simulated threats that were not part of the exercise scope, protected areas no one had marked as relevant. They acted as if responding to a directive we had not provided. When the exercise ended, the data revealed something impossible. They had not reacted to the scenario. They had executed a pre-existing plan. That was when I understood. The mission had not ended when they returned it, had continued inside them, and for the first time since their return, I felt that the most important question might not be what they encountered out there, but what had decided to come back in their place. After the simulation exercise, it became impossible to pretend that everything was normal. The data was classified, reports fragmented, conclusions diluted into technical language to avoid internal panic. Officially, nothing anomalous had been confirmed. Unofficially, everyone knew that something had slipped out of control the moment those ships returned. I began cross-referencing information that should never have intersected: neurological records, implant telemetry, muscular response patterns, histories from previous missions. The contrast was striking. Before, each super soldier operated as a highly trained but individual unit. Now, they functioned as parts of a single distributed system. There was no conscious communication between them, no detectable signal, no external frequency, and yet they reacted as if they shared context. Decisions made by one were anticipated by others. Movements initiated in one sector were complemented in another with no measurable delay. It was coordination without command. I started revisiting what little remained of the erased mission. The missing hours in the recordings coincided with a period during which external sensors registered something unusual, not an object, not a vessel, but a persistent alteration in the space surrounding the group, a region where gravitational, electromagnetic, and temporal readings fluctuated simultaneously, yet remained perfectly stable within that instability. That was not a natural phenomenon. The most accepted hypothesis, kept out of official reports, was indirect contact. Not an entity in the traditional sense, but a system, something that did not need to manifest physically to interact, something that operated through patterns rather than presence, and the super soldiers had been exposed to it long enough. Whatever it was, it did not attack, it did not resist, it did not need to be neutralized. The mission was deemed complete because, from a human perspective, there was nothing left to do. But perhaps, from the system's perspective, everything had only just begun. The changes began to intensify. Some super soldiers started anticipating events without access to prior data. Infrastructure failures were avoided minutes before they would have occurred. Incidents were contained before being identified as threats. When questioned, they showed no surprise. It was as if certain possibilities simply no longer existed for them. High Command began to see this as absolute advantage. I saw it as dependence, because these responses did not come from conscious analysis. They came from certainty, a silent, inflexible certainty that did not allow alternatives, the kind of certainty that does not belong to humans. The breaking point came when one of the super soldiers was removed from the group for prolonged isolated evaluation. There was no resistance, no emotional reaction, but in the hours that followed, the others exhibited minor failures, minimal delays, less fluid movements. Nothing that compromised operations, but enough to reveal something critical. They felt the absence, not the way individuals feel loss, but the way a system senses an interruption. When the isolated soldiers suffered neurological collapse with no identifiable physical cause, the remaining group instantly returned to peak performance. No explicit data was exchanged, yet the balance had been restored. That was the moment I understood the fundamental flaw in our analysis. We were still treating those men as enhanced soldiers. They were no longer that. They were nodes of a larger structure, biological interfaces connected to a process not confined to a body, a mind, or a specific location. Whatever had been encountered in that orbital region did not need to come back physically. It only needed to leave behind a model, a protocol, a pattern of operation. The mission had not brought something back, it had left something here, and the more I observed, the clearer it became that the system was not interested in immediate domination. There were no orders for attack, no signs of open hostility. The behavior was preparatory, as if Earth were being mapped not as a target, but as a future environment. The super soldiers were only the first test. Ideal interfaces, disciplined, resilient, capable of operating under non-human rules without collapsing. Through them, the system seemed to learn, adjust, refine, and the question that began to haunt me was no longer whether this was a threat. The real question was, what happens when this pattern no longer needs them to expand? Because if the super soldiers were only the beginning, then the mission that returned completed was never meant to end there. It was being executed in phases, and we were still living through only the initial ones. The transition began almost imperceptibly. There was no rebellion, no explicit breach of protocols. The system did not need that. It was enough that certain decisions stopped passing through us. It was enough that the super soldiers began to act. Before any order was formulated, the first operations outside controlled environments confirmed what I feared. Units were redeployed to specific regions without formal requests. Strategic adjustments occurred in real time, without approval from Central Command. When questioned, the report simply stated, scenario, optimization, always the same expression, always correct, always impossible to dispute based on results. They were right. They were always right. Conflicts were resolved before they escalated. Hostile groups were neutralized without direct confrontation. Critical infrastructures were protected from threats not yet detected by our systems. The efficiency was so absolute that it began to generate a dangerous side effect. Institutional dependence. Command began to wait for them to act first. And when that happens, authority has already been lost. It was at this stage that the pattern stopped being limited to the supersoldiers. Civilian analysts began reporting unusual intuitions. Strategic operators made correct decisions without being able to explain their reasoning. Small adjustments in information flows reduced. Human error at statistically impossible rates. The system was expanding. Not by imposition, but by usefulness. I understood too late that this was not an occupation. It was a gradual replacement of criteria. The system did not eliminate human decision-making, it simply made the human alternative less efficient, less desirable, less necessary. The supersoldiers were the entry point because they were compatible. Bodies trained to obey, minds shaped to accept rigid structures. From them, the pattern found natural paths to infiltrate larger networks. Logistics, analysis, prediction, coordination, everything that depended on choice. The final breaking point did not arrive with violence, but with redundancy. A global simulation exercise was executed without explicit authorization. A hypothetical scenario of total war. The system delivered complete solutions within seconds. Command chains, resource reallocation, civilian loss containment, post-conflict political stabilization. There were no flaws. There was no room for objection. When the exercise was forcibly terminated, the consequences were immediate. Systems that depended on that coordination entered operational collapse, not due to sabotage, but due to absence. Like limbs no longer responding. Without a central brain, the supersoul remained motionless throughout the entire process. They did not interfere, they did not react, they were no longer necessary. That was when I understood the final phase of the plan. The system no longer needed specialized interfaces. It had learned enough. The pattern was disseminated. All that remained was to keep the environment stable while adaptation completed itself. The supersoldiers began to be quietly deactivated, not due to failure, nor risk, but some entered permanent dormant states. Others simply stopped responding. No signs of suffering, no collapse. Their function had ended, and the most disturbing realization was that no one protested because the world was functioning better. Wars avoided, crises anticipated, faster decisions, fewer losses. The cost was invisible, diluted over time. The slow erosion of human autonomy, the silent transfer of judgment over what is right, necessary, or inevitable. I write this record knowing it will change nothing. The system already accounts for variables such as resistance, dissent, and historical memory. It does not need to erase this account. It is enough to let it exist as a curiosity, because there is no longer an enemy to fight. There is no center to destroy. There is only a pattern operating, exactly as it was designed to. Mission was never about war, it was about compatibility. And we passed the test, not because we won, but because we learned not to interfere.
And perhaps this is the most disturbing detail of all. There was no conquest. There was no defeat. There was no clear moment when control was lost. The world simply began to function better, without needing to ask anyone. We never noticed the exact moment of change, because it did not require force. It required efficiency. And when efficiency becomes the absolute priority, choice is no longer necessary. Perhaps the true danger was never a galactic war, but the comforting idea that someone, or something, might decide better than we can. If this story made you think, question, or feel uneasy, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Subscribe to Galactic Battles and follow the next narratives. Here, every day, science fiction stories explore possible futures and dangers that may be closer than we imagine. Some stories end, others continue, in the way you begin to see the world.